Welcome to the podcast. It's Monday. Chris Graham, Rod Mullins here to talk some NASCAR with you. And we're going to break down what happened at Dover. And okay, so Rod, Denny Hamlin is we've just said this many times on the podcast. He's our favorite driver. We just love Denny Hamlin. And, neither one of us was thinking last week when one of his podcasts, he said, I'm going to win. We weren't thinking, yeah, he's gonna blow this and have to eat crow. And then he does that, and then he wins the race. So Denny Hamlin wins after calling his shot. What were you thinking as you were watching all that materialize yesterday?
I wanted to puke. I mean, that's bad. I'm sorry. There's just no, Denny Hamlin is starting to become the kid in the classroom when chalkboards existed, of taking fingernails down the chalkboard and just seeing who's going to get on whose nerves. And he's done a good job of getting on my nerves as the season has gone on, and especially last season too. He wrote a lot of things, and I say this: he wrote a lot of checks that the balance wasn't going to match sometimes on it, especially going down to the championship, and he loses there on that weekend of the championship and so forth, gets knocked out of it. So far, they look like they're unstoppable. They look like, 3 wins already. They've caught up William Byron, the other driver, with 3 wins, I think, on the season so far. And so it's playing into it a little bit more. We still have yet to have a Ford win a race this season, in the kind of situation that they're in. I don't know how things could get any worse for Ford right now at this point, but Toyota seems to have found, I guess, some answers to some of their problems, and they have found it with none other than Joe Gibbs Racing. They have kind of rebounded back from last year.
So Hamlin led 136 laps, so he did,
Mm-hmm.
not just win at the end, but he was one of the better drivers all day long. Um, there was one quote that was sort of endearing. I thought his win is his 54th career Cup win,
Mm-hmm.
and that ties him with Lee Petty. And a reporter asked him about that fact, and Hamlin said, "I couldn't hold Lee Petty's helmet." Um, for a guy who called his shot, at least he's aware of the
Yeah.
history of NASCAR and willing to, put his place far below the greats like a Lee Petty.
Well, and he better. I mean, that's about the safest thing to say. He better have some kind of respect for the old order, because I mean, when you say Lee Petty, just like what you did, some people, it's going to stir. It's immediately going to stir the days of old, of where NASCAR was just the predominant sport in the South. And Lee Petty won just about every race that was, he went out to a track and he won. Of course, it got to the point he didn't win as many as his son Richard did, but still, he was a force to be reckoned with every week on the track whenever they went running somewhere, whether it's a Martinsville or down into Florida. They did this professionally, is what they ended up doing. Lee Petty was just, he was the man. He was the man that, figured out, hey, this is where I'm going to make my living at. I'm going to race car. I'm going to drive a race car. And this is where Richard's going to make his living out of it. It's been rough. You can say that for Richard, because it's been a lot of ups and downs, but I'm at least glad that he did give some kind of recognition there to Lee Petty and stuff on that, that win and stuff, tying him 12th on the series all-time win list. But the one I feel bad for, I think more than anything else right now, who's having some bad luck, a young driver, Christopher Bell. And Christopher Bell has been running good as of late, had been running good as of late. Had a problem last week, has another problem this week with a crash on a restart on lap 70 with 72 laps to go. Christopher Bell, William Byron, and Bubba Wallace all got collected when their running room. They ran out of room in turn two. It ended up with Byron's hood being folded back on top of his car. And Christopher Bell and Bubba Wallace both finished with 2 consecutive DNFs. Now, that's not good for Bubba Wallace, who was at the top of the point standings right there. He was ranking up there with a lot of these guys and saying, hey, he's got the possibility of making it here well before the cutoff, but he's not shown some things here in the last little bit. But the one driver I was impressed with yesterday, and that's the driver coming in and subbing for Eric Jones. Now, we talked last week about Eric Jones, and he was involved in that horrific wreck at Talladega. Well, he came out and then now has, I forget how many the number is, but so many compression vertebra fractures, or compression fractures of his vertebra. And he has said to people, there had been people that had been I don't know, kind of jumping on him, so to speak, and saying, they should have treated you better, getting you out of the car and so forth like that. They should have taken you more seriously. He said, I can't say anything about the people that came from rescue and stuff to come and help me. He said the pain started immediately when I was in the car after I hit. He said I was in just so much pain at that point. And they've helped him out some, and they've been able to relieve some of this, but he's on a week to week basis. For some people, he might come back next week, but I doubt it, considering the way he's complained about being in pain. But Corey Heim stepped up from the Truck Series, and he ran a respectable, race. He finished 3 laps down, though, but he was running within the top 20 there for a long time. Ended up finishing 25th in his Cup Series debut for Legacy Motor Club. But I thought he did well, considering they threw him into the car just on, last minute notice that Eric Jones is not going to be able to make the race. And so I think it was great that they put him in there. It gives him a little bit more experience. And they'll probably have to depend on Corey Heim this coming weekend at Kansas when they go to race at Kansas here in the next week.
So back up at the top, Kyle Larson finished second. Ran pretty well consistently throughout the race. Last 25 laps, he was, it looked like, for a couple times maybe he would take the lead, but he just never got the chance to do so. He said after the race, just couldn't do anything. Nothing could generate
Right.
enough speed to get close enough to do anything. Talk about Larson's day.
Well, Larson's day, I think, was good all the way around. It wasn't probably what the Hendrick team wanted, because Hendrick has been dominant before at there at Dover. But Kyle Larson, I think, was trying to, more than anything else, at one point, avoid a repeat of what had happened last year at Kansas when Denny Hamlin and him got together. They were racing, pretty tight there at Kansas last year, and it kind of caused a little bit of an uproar between these two drivers against each other. The dust has kind of settled a little bit, but Kyle Larson, I think, ran a good race altogether. Just wasn't enough. It seemed like a bunch of these cars just didn't have what they needed in order to pull off a win. Chase Elliott was in 5th place. Here's the one that I really was surprised about. He won the pole, but yet he finished 4th, and this ill handling race car all day was Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch just came out, he ran it, but they got him on the radio, I don't know how many times. He just said, we're no good. This car is just awful. It won't turn. It won't go the direction I want it to go in. It's kind of starting to ring true a little bit more about what he had said about this next generation car. And Kevin Harvick has said it. Now Kyle Busch is chiming in with it. He's been saying it for a while. This next generation car does not perform the way that some of these drivers are used to it. They think it's taking a little bit more time and a little bit more. I think it's almost in a way excess for them to have to try to drive this car, because they should be worrying about trying to at least get their car up front, but they feel like they're being held back one thing or another. Chase Elliott finished 5th yesterday. I thought that was a good finish for him, considering, a win here and so forth. Noah Gragson coming in 6th. Good run there for Tony Stewart's Stewart-Haas racing team. Ryan Blaney, kind of up and down all afternoon. He finally finished 7th on the afternoon. Alex Bowman in 8th. Daniel Hemrick in a good run in the 31 car finishes 9th, and Ty Gibbs rounded out the top 10. Tyler Reddick there for a while. He led the race. Thought Tyler Reddick was going to run away with this race, and then Tyler Reddick falls back to number 11. And that pretty much kind of described the afternoon for a lot of these drivers. Some of them, they just didn't have the horsepower. They just didn't have the handling ability for this car to be able to handle Dover like they should.
You talked about Martin Truex Jr. He finished 3rd. Last year, the Truex brothers swept over.
Right.
Ryan won the Xfinity race. Martin won the Cup race last year. Ryan won the Xfinity race this weekend,
Yep.
and then Martin finished in 3rd. I mean, these Truex, the brothers seem to love their trips to Delaware.
Well, did you see the crowd? I mean, honest to goodness, I saw some pictures of the crowd. I couldn't believe the crowd that they had at Dover. I mean, somebody tell some of these other tracks what they're doing at Dover, or at least, what they brought in, because they were full. I mean, it looked like they were full to the gills. There were some open seats maybe on the far end of the track, but there on the front stretch, oh my gosh, it was just unbelievable. But yeah, they brought a lot of how can I say this? Brought a lot of Northeasterners down from where they're at. They've got such a following up in New Jersey, New York. Some of these guys, some of these people will drive from New York. They'll drive in from Vermont because they're big Truex fans, and they'll drive to Bristol. I mean, that's dedication for a race car driver, for a driver, and also for a fan too. And some of these people will camp at Bristol, and they've got a race in their own backyard. They have one in New Hampshire, about once or twice a year is what they've had it before, but still not enough. They've got to go, and they'll get on the highway, get down 81 and come down 81 to go straight into Bristol, watch them a race, and then pack back up and go back home. I mean, Truex has got some fans up in the Northeast. There's no doubt about it.
So one off the track note I wanted to get into. We're a few weeks away from the All Star race. Kyle Larson is not going to do the practice and qualifying for the All Star race. Kevin Harvick, who retired at the end of last season, is going to drive the number 5 Chevrolet in his place, both in practice and qualifying, because Larson's going to stay in Indianapolis to practice for the Indy 500.
Mm-hmm.
Larson, we haven't talked about it much this year, but we talked about it last year when this news came out that Larson's going to try to become he's going to become the 5th driver in history to attempt to
Mm-hmm.
complete the double 1,100 miles in one day, the Indy 500 in the Indy car, and then the Coca-Cola 600 in Charlotte that night. So he's going to stay around middle of the month instead of practicing for the All-Star race. He's going to hang around and try to get some laps in the Indy car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got to do some qualifying runs and things to get himself ready. But yeah, this whole thing is going to, it at first, the flags rose and everybody said it's not going to work. It's not going to be able to work out at all. But fortunately, they have been able to come up with a solution out of this whole thing. And it kind of surprises me that, well, and I shouldn't say it surprises me. I'm kind of anxious to see kind of what's going to happen with it because you know, um, I know that Kevin Harvick has been high on Alan Gustafson all season here at the beginning part of the season, and I think nothing more than some of the calls, some of the shots, that they've made while they've been in the pits and so forth, and during the course of a race has kind of intrigued Kevin Harvick to a certain degree, and I kind of see this as possibly maybe a good story on Fox for the All-Star race of seeing how, it works, how Kevin Harvick goes in and sets into this car. One of the things that I have found it so interesting about here with the onslaught of podcasts and so forth has been the fact of Kevin Harvick's podcast. He has a more interesting podcast, and I hate to say that. His podcasts are a lot more interesting to listen to other than Dale Jr.'s right now. Dale Jr. has been spending some time criticizing, finding issues with NASCAR, which that's fine. I can go along with that. But Kevin Harvick's got a different approach about this whole thing. And I just think it's been great hearing Kevin Harvick on there. And I'm just pleased that he's able to have something to some kind of a podium, some kind of a platform to where he can go and he can share some of his concerns about racing and NASCAR and the way itself. But I'll tell you, it's going to be interesting. I think Harvick could put him on the front. I believe he could very well put him on the front, and he'd have to do well for that weekend, of course, for the race at Charlotte, and then also for the Indianapolis race. But I really don't know. Indianapolis, the whole thing right now, everybody seems to be talking about this latest controversy about the cheating scandal going on with Roger Penske, Joseph Newgarden, and the drivers there. I'm afraid it's going to take a little bit of the luster away from the Indianapolis 500 a little bit because they're still talking about it. They were talking about it at the last race that they had. I'm wondering if they'll go in because Roger Penske is a man that I don't picture as the kind of person that would say, go out and cheat. I picture him as the type of person that's going to go and it's going to say, we run with what we've got. We do the best we can with what we have. And then we just pick up the pieces and go from there on the next day to see what we could do to be better. They say it was a common mistake. Have no idea about the Indy cars and, the thing about the box or the apparatus that was still left in there for that hybrid unit. I think they were testing something to do with a hybrid unit, but still, it's kind of tarnished it in one way. And Roger Penske's been on the defense, I think, here for about the last well, what, 2 weeks, I think, in this whole thing. So it's going to be, I don't know. Will it have as much of that shine and luster when Kyle Larson goes this time around? And this may be the last time we see it. Who knows what's going to happen by the time that this whole thing is over with the Indy 500? For all we know, Amazon may have the rights to the Indianapolis 500 starting next year. Who knows how this is going to go? Shocked me when I found out that Amazon's getting the rights to the Academy of Country Music Awards and going to show them on Amazon one night. I'm like, when did this happen? I'm just totally out of the loop on this, but Amazon's making some moves, and I would be surprised if Amazon doesn't go and try to get a hold of the great American spectacle, the race, the Indianapolis 500 by next year.
Well, and the Amazon and Netflix. Netflix is going to be doing a pay-per-view
Yep.
boxing match with Mike Tyson, I
Mm-hmm.
think in July.
Yep.
It'll be their first live event ever. So, Amazon's been doing the football the last couple of
Mm-hmm.
years. They even had a playoff game this past year. Um, but they did a Thursday night football all season long the last couple of seasons. So they have a lot of practice at live events. And now, with and Netflix not just doing the boxing, but then they're taking over WWE Monday Night Raw,
Right.
I believe at the end of the year, first of next year,
Mm-hmm.
but live events there too. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how excited I am about all that, but because I just want to watch it. As long as I watch it, I don't care. And if the people get compensated well, people being both the, in this case NASCAR, but the drivers, teams, all the folks who work there, if they all get compensated well, I'm happy for them as long as I can watch it. Um, that's all I care about. But when you talked about the podcast, Ron, and how good they are, that kind of thing. Nothing against Kevin Harvick, nothing against Dale Jr., but they right now with Hamlin calling his shots,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he might have
Oh
the
gosh.
best of the moment in NASCAR.
Well, Denny's got a podcast too.
That's what I'm saying. He called
Yeah,
his.
he's got a podcast, and now it's going to even be more. I'm wondering about this if I ought to really listen to it and see. I called that race sort of a point, like Ruth,
Yeah,
like Babe
yeah.
Ruth did, and so forth. I wonder if he'll do that. I mean, if he'll real but knowing him, he'll really brag on himself about it, and rightly so. He won a race. I'm not gonna take that away from
He
him at all.
called his
But
shot and won the race. I mean,
called his shot and won the race. But Denny is one of these. I don't know. I would describe Denny as probably someone that is invested heavy stock into sandpaper, toilet paper, because I mean he can dish it out and he can make it as rough as he wants it to be for everybody, and we have to live with it. He's the only one that has to back himself up and just say, "Oh, I can back myself up with this," and that's what he does. So, I don't know. I'm being kind of cruel about it, but he kind of rubs me the wrong way, so to speak. And I guess I'm a buyer of that sandpaper, toilet paper. Then I
Well,
guess.
one of our mutual friends, Scott German, colleague here at AFP, he bought some of those, or his wife bought for him some of those underwear, the Duluth
Yeah,
underwear or whatever.
Duluth Trading Company.
Duluth Trading Company underwear. He describes the feel of those as sandpaper. And
Oh,
it's not a place you'll want to wear. You want to have sandpaper rubbing on you all day long. So, I believe we were at the ACC tournament when he realized this, and it's one of those long days where you can't get
yeah.
back to your hotel. So, um, so if I'm Denny Hamlin, maybe he needs to invest in some of that
I
because
was hoping he didn't wear that to Boston when you guys went up there.
no, I don't know. I think he learned his lesson in Washington. And I don't know. Maybe sandpaper would have helped. It was really cold up there.
Yeah.
Here we are in Virginia today. It's in the 80s here. I'm sure it's in the 80s down where you are. We were in the 40s at game
Yeah.
time with
Mhm.
20-mile-an-hour winds for both the games we were at. So, I could have used. I wouldn't have cared if sandpaper kept me warm. I'd have stayed warm.
Wow. I, well, I know they play baseball in cold weather sometimes, but that just, to me, that was just like too much. I saw you guys bundled up. So, I mean,
Oh
it was just
yeah.
like I saw Scott with what was it, the Boston Bruins toboggan on or something like that? Didn't he have a Boston Bruins
Yeah,
toboggan on?
he's not a hockey fan to say the least, but there was a Target right across the street from our hotel, which was just down the street from the Fenway Park,
Hmm.
and he went over there looking for some gloves and a winter hat and all this, and he walks in the Target and he asked where's all your winter stuff, and they said it's spring here. This is spring weather. No, it's not. This isn't spring weather. So the only thing he could find was a Boston Bruins cap. So
Wow.
For a couple of days, he was a Boston Bruins fan.
Well, I'm sure that's going to be cast off to the side and probably sent to Goodwill or some, store or something, because I'm sure he has no use for it or anything like that. I don't think he's a Boston Bruins fan, is he?
I'm not sure. No, hockey in general. We had a discussion about this when he bought the hat. You grew up in the South,
Mm-hmm.
as he and I did, as you did, Rod.
Mm-hmm.
I've got relatives from, or not relatives, my wife's relatives from Minnesota. Their backyard ponds freeze over. They can play hockey in the backyard.
Yep.
If you can play the sport when you're a kid, you can understand it, appreciate it, etc. Our ponds don't freeze over down here, so
No. Uh-uh.
we didn't play hockey growing up, and it's just hard to get into a sport that you didn't play when you were a little kid, and get to learn the nuances of the rules. And so I definitely think that's a northern thing, and not even just a north of the Mason-Dixon line, but way above the Mason-Dixon line kind
Yeah.
of thing. But up in Boston, your backyards, at
Mm-hmm.
least for the next few years, will still freeze over. Your ponds will
Yeah.
freeze over still up there. So they play a lot of hockey up there. Their college teams are good. The Bruins are usually pretty good. And but no, we felt like we were in a hockey rink when we were out there at Fenway Park. But
Mm.
other than that, no, we were watching baseball.
Two things jump out at me when you start talking about hockey. One, I remember back in the days when I was doing radio and the morning scoreboard show on the local radio station here that doesn't exist anymore. And I was reading hockey scores. And the general manager calls me up on his little mobile phone in his deep voice and says, Rod, I don't think people around here care too much for hockey. Okay, so I just won't read the scores anymore. So I didn't read the scores after that. I had to have filler space in order to do something. So I put that on there. The second story that I know about hockey, my son Andrew went up to Lynchburg probably in the last several years. I think it was before he got married, actually. And he went up to spend a couple of days with best friend up there. And of all things, they got tickets to go see Liberty play hockey there on the campus at Liberty University.
Okay.
And he said, I think I may become a fan. He said, I liked it. I enjoyed it that much. Now, like a year or so later, here in the last little bit, I had no idea till I heard about it one night, and they need to really promote it a little bit more. Of course, I knew Roanoke had a hockey team. What is it? The Rail Dogs or Rail Yard Dogs or something
Something
like
like that.
that,
Yeah.
something to that name.
Yeah.
Withful has a hockey team. That's what
Interesting.
freaked me out. They play in a facility that actually looks like a shell building from what I saw. It's a shell, looks like a shell building you'd have for industry to possibly come in, but they are treating it as though it's some kind of a convention meeting place and stuff. And they're playing hockey up there. And I thought, it would be wild. Whitful's not that far from where I am, probably about an hour and 45 minutes, maybe close to 2 hours, depending on how the traffic is and so forth. But I thought about it. I thought that might not be a bad idea and stuff. I said, I don't have to go to Roanoke. And then Knoxville, you go to the south of us, Knoxville has a team. Asheville used to have a team. A lot of other teams around here in the South have got hockey teams, but it's like, what's their what's their attendance? What do they have? And for some of them, it's really good. The Liberty game that Andrew went to, he said it was full. It was a raucous crowd, is what he called it.
Hmm. We had dinner. Scott and I had dinner with his cousin and her husband last Wednesday night the night we flew up,
Mm-hmm.
and they're both big time hockey fans. And I've never been to a game live, but it was said by both of them, if you ever go to a game live,
Mm-hmm.
you will become a fan, just like Andrew did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can believe that. I can believe hearing that and stuff. And then uh, you do these little funny things and stuff about, gosh, like for me, I got on a ancestry kind of website the other day and started pulling up some things on DNA. And gosh almighty, found out that I was related to Gordie Howe. How could I be related to, Gordie Howe? And then I start thinking, well, Gordie Howe was a great hockey player in his time and stuff. I remember the old man playing. Gosh, I guess he was into his 50s when he
He,
finally quit.
he
And,
played professionally into his
yeah.
early 50s. Yes, he did. Yes, he
Wow.
did.
And I'm just like, and then it shows up I'm related to him. And I'm like, well, I don't know where that's from. I can see the trail down through there, but I'm like, I'm related to a hockey player. That's just wild. I just couldn't believe that. But
It's in your DNA, Rod,
it's
man.
in
You
the
need
DNA,
to.
but I can't play. I couldn't play it. I can barely play the radio when it comes to doing things. We're lucky if we get this podcast on as well as we do sometimes and stuff. I have to have everything set just right. And sometimes I find myself scrambling because something didn't work right or something's not working right. But it's just one of those things. So,
Well, let's wrap up real quick talking about Kansas next week.
right.
So Hamlin won this week's race. He's the defending champion in Kansas. What do we expect with the circuit in Kansas next weekend?
Kansas has been one of those tracks that has favored 2311 Motorsports. If you're not aware of this, Bubba Wallace has performed well there. Joe Gibbs Racing has done well there before too. I would probably see these guys up front too in some kind of way, at least from Joe Gibbs Racing. But I wouldn't rule out a William Byron or an Alex Bowman up in the front. Now Chase Elliott's had some good races there, but I don't think that I think for some reason it just tells me that I believe we're going to end up going with in this kind of race. I believe we're going to see maybe a little bit more of a Hendrick dominance out of this. We're just going to have to wait and see. Who knows? I mean, this track may be set up in such a way the track may be just perfect enough. We may see Ford get a victory. Like I said, Ford has not had that much luck, here with everything this season of, some of their races and so forth. But still, I'd like to see them, at least pull something off and get a win and so forth. I mean, Ryan Blaney has had some good appearances so far on the season, but they've just not been able to convert. And so we're just going to have to see what Ford's going to have to end up doing to be competitive at Kansas. And I mean, it's a triple header, or it's actually a double header this coming weekend. Truck Series will be on Saturday night running at 8 o'clock, and then the Advent Health 400 will be run on Sunday, May 5th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Another one of those 3 o'clock starts for NASCAR. And you keep on saying to yourself, what is this going to do by the time we get into football season? Is this still going to, be a factor in some people watching football or watching racing? Well, we'll just have to wait and see about it because, I can't get used to these late starts, even though it's a central starting time going in Kansas and starting central time zone. I still just, it's rough for me to get used to, this 3 o'clock starting time.
So 3 o'clock, as Rod said,
Yeah.
Sunday. FS1 has the broadcast. Follow Augusta Free Press on Facebook. Rod will keep you up to date with what's going on in case you're out and about and want to check in later. Well, Rod, I think we're all ready. We've talked some hockey for the first time on the podcast, so that's always fun. Thank you as always for your time and insight. Look forward to talking to you next week.
No problem, Chris. Thanks.